Hello and welcome everyone to our expert session, Untie the Knots, How to Navigate Change with Confidence. I'm Carmen, I'm marketing lead at Ray Sono, and I'll be your host for today. So before I hand over to our two experts, Regina Puls and Dr. Franz Steinberger, I'll take you through a very quick round of housekeeping, and I'll give you a bit of background on who we are at Ray Sono, just to set the stage for our two experts. All right, so let's go. Yes, so in a nutshell, what do we do at Ray Sono? We basically help businesses to become future ready. And how we do that is by identifying their digital potentials and helping them to focus on what truly matters to them, or what really drives impact for them or for their business case at a particular point in time. And then we collaborate closely with our clients to bring these solutions to life. Here are a couple of facts to back this up. So as you can see, we are around for more than 25 years now, quite a while. And where we thrive is basically in complex digital environments. So it's in B2B as well as in B2C. On the right-hand side, you can see some of our clients. And I think what's a number that we are particularly proud of is the 8 years of average client relationship that we have, because that really shows that for us, it's not just about delivering work, but also the trust and the long-term partnerships that we create with our clients. And when I say we, I mean a team of 250 digital experts. We work across the fields of strategy, design, communications, technology, and execution. And I think what unites us as a team, and that's where we really make a difference, is our radical focus on impact. And I think this is also where it gets relevant for today, because most of our projects are not labeled as change projects or change initiatives. But whenever you start a project, or you implement a new product, or you redesign a process, or you scale a tool, you need human behavior to change. And when it comes to human behavior, if there's no shift in behavior, nothing will change and there's no impact. And that's why Regina and Franz will share their insights that they collected within the past years of making sure that change doesn't look good on a slide or on paper, but they share the frameworks and tools they use to make it actually stick, so that it leads to real life impacts. So I would say spotlight on for the two of them. And please, as a last thing, this is meant to be an interactive session. So feel free to pop your questions into the chat. The two of them will have a look on the chat, and they will answer all your questions within the next 45 minutes or hour or so. There's someone who can't see the slides. It comes from Matthias rejoining the call. I think that's a good idea. Or does anybody else have that problem? If so, please let us know. All right, good. Then I hand over to our two experts. For the rest of you, enjoy, and I'll see you later for a quick outro.
Well, thanks, Carmen, for landing that plane, as it were. I think now everything's settled. People are seeing slides. Everything's working, I believe. Anyway, thanks for having us. Thanks all to you for coming to this little webinar of ours. We're very happy that so many have joined the conversation, and we're thrilled to learn what you guys have to say about the things that we propose. The name is Franz. I've been with Ray Sono for almost 7 years at this point. I've got a background in education, and this is why I naturally gravitate towards people topics, if it were. And I've had a couple of people topics in the projects over the last couple of years. And most of these projects were never labeled as transformation or change projects, because they never are. But in the end, they are change and transformation projects, whether we like it or not. Luckily, I've been in some if not most of those challenging projects with my esteemed colleague and friend, Regina, who will also share the stage with me today.
Thank you, Franz, for handing over. Welcome, everyone. It's more than 50 people. I'm really excited to share some things with all of you. My name is Regina. I've been part of Ray Sono for a bit over 7 years now, 10 years overall in the digital landscape. And why am I here talking about change? Because my background in human-centered design focuses all around the questions, how do people interact with novel technology, new systems, new processes? And this is also why we've came up with the metaphor of knots. So over the years, both of us have supported many clients, teams, and organizations in different technological projects and also in transformational projects. And what we've encountered is a lot of tangling situations. So situations where nothing is clear, everyone is looking for focus, things get tight-knit and really knotted. And we thought it's a really good metaphor because how do you untangle these knots? How do you get out of this stuck pose? What we've brought is some things that we've learned over the years that help us to really untangle those things. Before we start, what kind of change are we talking about today? So we're not talking about everyday decisions, small changes, we get new software, we kind of have to do things different every day. But what we are interested in and what we encounter in our projects is really transformative change. So new technology that hasn't been tested yet, business cases that really stretch our thinking, so pioneering work, things that haven't been done before or only have been done once or twice, and you kind of need to adapt that for your organization and your team. Also things that take a very new perspective. So where we really expand our thinking into kind of ways, how will the world work if we are more autonomous? How will teams work if they are structured differently? How do we structure things in a world that is changing every day really fast? So this is the kind of change we're talking about. Keep that in mind. And we know all of you are in the webinar because something resonated with you, the untying the knot thing or the change management things. So before we start, we really want to know, where do you feel you stand in your change journey? So we have 4 options. I'm going to go through them while we start the poll. So are you in a planning mode? So have you committed to change something, but you're still figuring out how to do that, what timing, what approach, how to communicate it? Are you in an implementation phase? So are you navigating change? You've committed, you're doing change, but now you face obstacles left and right. Or have you already adopted a change mindset and you are an expert in change, you kind of lean into the mindset of change is part of everyday work? Or you might be on the resetting path, so you've started implementing, you hit a dead end, you're kind of taking stock, adjusting and starting afresh. So I'm really excited on seeing where people in the audience lean towards. Answers are coming in slowly. Yes, I can see that.
Yeah, they're coming.
Yeah, we have a few here.
I'm wondering, I was expecting more of the resetting folks, but I believe the navigating option is the safest one, isn't it? It's basically, we're into this and not everything's working according to plan.
I thought we would have, honestly, more people stuck in planning phase, so just about to take the leap into managing change actively.
That's true. That's true. Yeah, it seems the masses attract, so ever more people in the navigating phase. But there's also a fair share of experts, which is especially interesting when we come to the question part, because I'm wondering what these folks think about the things that we propose. All right. Some more coming in. Yeah.
Yeah, let's wait for a little bit. I think about half of people have already voted. So we can only encourage you to vote. It's anonymous, so we don't know who said what, but it gives us a really good picture on where people stand, and maybe we can pick out some of the things we have, especially for the different groups.
Yeah, but there's a fair share of people who are involved in change management, as it seems. And so we've got the right crowd, is what I'm saying.
Exciting.
Yeah. All right. What you reckon?
Yeah.
Let's go.
Let's go ahead.
Let's go ahead. Well, thanks to those of you who participated in this. We believe, or we hope, we anticipated a mixture of interests and phases where you guys are in. So I believe we have something for everybody, but I'm especially interested, of course, in the view of other experts and in the views of those people who are navigating change at the moment and what you've learned, what you've come up with. So maybe we have an opportunity to go into that in the questions. Talking of which, there will be questions in the presentation. Question slides are not just a big part or big chunk at the end. So feel free, keep them coming in the chat. We monitor it as we go, and we have points where we get into these questions of yours. Now, what's to be expected today? A quick word on those expectations, what you can expect from us. Now, we won't go into a theoretical deep dive on change management. There's lots of books, the classics, from Kotter to the ATCAR model of change. So this won't be a theory lecture, but we will also not go into canvases and checklists and hands-on things that the 12th iteration of the lean change management canvas, stuff like that. We won't go into that either. We populate a comfortable middle ground. We will talk about mental models, how we understand change, our general approach to it, and what we've learned over the years. So this is sort of the common ground between theory and practice that we want to inhabit. With that out of the way, let's get going. Now, why does every project start to feel like a change management project sooner or later, right? That's the fundamental questions. Why do we even have to talk about it? After all, we've got more than 50, almost 60 people in this call. All of you work in organizations that have probably hundreds of years of combined project management experience in your organizations. So we must have seen everything, right? So why is this so hard? Why can't we just plan it from the start and be done with it? And no matter how much we plan, at the end, we always end up with a feeling that looks a lot like this. We launch a new initiative, a fundamental program to change the way we're working, and then we're there. So something's not working, the training materials that we've come up with, the videos that we've recorded, nobody's watching them. That tool that we spent months of building, nobody's really using it. And the question is, what do we do now? Because we're here in the midst of it all. We're in the middle of this big knot, and we don't know what to do. Now, the problem is basically the complexity of our modern organizations. So if, for instance, we might be located in the sales department, or we might be looking at the sales department, why aren't they selling the product that we spent months building? But the problem is, with digital transformation especially, there's so many people involved. The entire organization with its entire complexity is involved. The marketing team, the product team, customer units, finance, the business units, managers, and the technology team, and so many more. And that's just sort of the entities that we're aware of. And there's so many structures, people in between that are involved. So this is the fundamental problem that we're dealing with, complex organizations. In short, we're dealing with humans, right? That's what change management or change and transformation basically implies. We're dealing with people. And these people come packed with their own little backpacks of things that they're coming to us. They have their own set of goals, what they want to achieve at work and in their lives. They are motivated, both extrinsically and intrinsically. And they sit in between these complex processes that modern organizations put forward. A structure of hierarchies, technology tools that have to be used or that sort of dictate how we operate. Ever worked in project management? Well, hopefully you have a great project management software, because otherwise this piece of software dictates the way you work. And there's processes, information flows, and often forgotten, each one of those people comes with a set of competencies and skills that are good enough, great, not so great for tackling transformation topics. So this is actually something that gets forgotten quite often. And somehow all of this is just supposed to work. But how? And let's be honest, change is a messy enterprise. We all know that. And we're not just alone with this feeling. There's been a plethora of studies that have been carried out that just basically tell the same story again and again. Most transformation programs fail to deliver what they promise to deliver, or fail entirely, don't work at all. Or if they do put things forward that are useful, they go over budget and over time, because it's always more complicated than anyone had anticipated. Why is that? What's going wrong? Now, according to our experience, this is how transformation and change efforts typically unfold. There's a group of well-meaning people, mostly in upper management. Small group, knows each other, wants the best for the company. And they come up with a plan, a very elaborate plan, a plan that's very ambitious. And it plans everything out from the get-go. All the measures that have to be taken, all the programs that have to be built, and we end up with a wonderful Microsoft project timeline of things that need implementing. And then these plans get handed over to a poor group of middle managers, mostly, who are supposed to then roll out these changes. And surprisingly, all these changes, all these programs, and that wonderful roadmap get into problems. It all feels clunky, it's slower than expected, you run into issues that you didn't anticipate, and at the end, only few of those changes actually stick. So few of those actually work. Most just fade out in the ether, and if we're lucky, we end up on a higher impact level after the entire program than we did beforehand. But even that isn't guaranteed. The real question then is, how do we break this cycle? How do we not get into that story of events? That's the real question, isn't it? And I think one thing is clear, no matter how elaborate or how new or how innovative our approach is or isn't, we can't avoid volatility. Where there's people, there is volatility. We can't just avoid all problems by a wonderful magic method of ours. So we can't control volatility, but we can navigate it. And that's why we propose a somewhat different approach. Our change model has also 3 phases, because people like 3 things, and it's nice to count 1, 2, 3. It's one reason. Another reason is we actually believe in this and we tested it in the field. Now, this is basically our approach in a nutshell, and we go into the each and individual phase to give you a bit more depth. So we co-create a shared vision of the future. We have to do this, but not in a small chamber with a couple of people, but in a more co-creative fashion. We then prototype possible solutions, prototype as in field test actual solutions, and then find out what works and scale what works. And this is where we focus today. And if I say we focus today, I mean us, as in us and you guys. Because after all, change is a leadership topic. When we define leadership as the navigation of a group of people from a defined starting point in the present to a different and clearly simplified state in the future, which is, I think, a rather fair definition of leadership, then it's our job as leaders to do change management, whether we like it or not, because we're trying to influence people's behavior to go from A to B. And for that, I'll hand over to Regina, who tells you about that future.
Thank you. So let's start in the beginning. Franz already said it, desirable futures is the thing that we start with. But how do we even define a desirable future? So how do we get to a vision that that helps us through the transformations, that doesn't give us, that isn't restricting us in a way, and that survives project realities? So visions always sound good when they are on their own, but once they hit the project roadmap, there's obstacles left and right coming in, there's conflict, there is criticism in the vision. So how do we make sure that the thing that we built isn't what we've probably all experienced in the past, a very shiny vision statement without traction behind it, or it's very replaceable? So what we've come across in many projects is very mediocre, replaceable vision statements, things that could be applicable to any organization, that has no focus, that isn't tailored to the things that you actually want to do in your context. So it's kind of taken out of context. And the last thing is, it's very strict. So it's not a vision, it's actually a plan, it's tactics. You kind of planned out everything that's about to happen, and you're restricting yourself because you only have one way forward and no way out. What we found, there's three things that help us to kind of avoid those knots that you see here. And the first one is, it's not new. I guess everyone has heard about it, co-create. So bring everyone on the table, hear everyone's voice, and everyone's voice counts, but clarity wins over consensus. So it's not democracy. We kind of collect everything, but once we have the door wide open for people to get their input or to bring their input to the table, we also have to close the doors again. We have to curate, we have to challenge and sharpen the things that we've heard. Because it's not a democracy and it's not opinion land and not wishful thinking, it's based on data. It's like requirements engineering. So those of you who come from a human-centered design background as well know that. What you input into requirements engineering is not what you're going to get out. So there's a whole process behind it. And the same is with visions. So you kind of collect the things. In the middle, you see the yellow dot, the value. You take the value out of everything that you've gathered, and then you communicate it back. And you need to communicate it in the language of the people you have gathered it from. So imagine you get a lot of input from finance, you get a lot of input from process, you get a lot of input from your operations, and they all speak their entirely own language. So once you created the value, make sure to translate it from your business language back into their languages. So there's a picture that I really like. Imagine you're trying to go undercover and expose a drug ring. If you don't speak the language, if you have the wrong vocabulary, if you have the wrong behavior, if you act differently, this will just fail from the beginning. It's the same with vision statements and values. If you cannot translate it to the language people speak, it won't generate any traction. The second thing is, and that helps us with this exercise of value generation, is stress test everything that you do from a future perspective and from multiple perspectives. We have three lenses that we do that with. One is the user, so everyone affected. The second one is experts. So domain knowledge is super important in that case. And the last one is business and strategy, because we need something that really brings us forward in the end, also on a business level. If we ignore any of these lenses, we are getting a vision that lacks something. So for example, we have a lot of domain experts who know about stuff, who are really smart, who have been in the industry for ages, and we have a good business strategy and we know where to go. But we miss out getting input from the people that are affected by the change, we will lack the reality check. And we've seen that over and over again, this leads to a lack of adoption in the end. So only once we've considered all three lenses, we get a very sustainable and viable vision, and we have something that really can gain traction. And the last thing is one of my favorites. If you get in the zone of really transformative futures, don't go with goals and don't go with vision statements, because those are really good for planning short and midterm work for teams and organizations. But when you talk about those bigger changes, consider 4 large forces and consider scenario building within those forces. So the 4 forces that we usually consider is technology. That's usually where we start with. So we have some technological change. Might be new software, might be how do we integrate artificial intelligence in our organization. Could be anything really. How does it affect people? And then it doesn't stop, but we consider larger forces. One is the ecosystem. So how does it integrate into, for example, our supply chain? How does it integrate into our partner network? How does it integrate into the context we are? Could be regional, could be global, whatever it is, but we have to consider that kind of ecosystem. And the last thing is culture. So you can make a lot of change, but it will not gain traction if you don't also adjust culture. So think about, you want to establish a totally new business model, totally new way of working. You also have to change the way your organization thinks about itself. When building scenarios, that gives you a very safe space to kind of experiment. And we're going to talk about experimenting just in a bit, because that ties in with the minimum viable change that we are proposing. But before that, once you've done that, once you have very clear and translated values, when you know, okay, what we've seen is really proof for discussions and criticism, and you've mapped out scenarios, how could the future look like, and what would have to be true that we succeed in this future, you have the base layer, where you can translate your strategy into real impact, and you can do that in 2 ways. The first way is you can communicate it upwards, so into what we all know, vision statements, purpose of transformation, why are we really doing that, and organizational relevance, so why is it important that we do that now. And you can also communicate that downwards, so into direct initiatives. What are the goals, what are the KPIs people need to hit? What are the tools, plans, and guides we have in place? And how does everyone benefit from this? I would like everyone to take a couple of seconds to reflect what you think is the most important part or most important level in this communication pyramid. Because we found usually people think it's why are we changing and why is it relevant now? But numbers say the most important thing that we need is actually tools, plans, and guides. So how do we expect the people affected by change to act? What kind of playing field do they have where they can take decisions and responsibility? And what are they actually working towards, as in goals and KPIs? All right. The chat is open if there are any questions on the vision part. If we don't, I would hand over to Franz to talk about the prototyping phase, because if you have built a lot of scenarios, you could now do a lot of things, but how do you decide what to do?
Sure, yeah. I would have been curious, though, to see where people land in that pyramid of yours, like the one we just discussed, because according to my experience, very often you end up with this entire, why are we doing this, the video from the CEO, which all of us have watched at some point, about the why and the goals and the future, and yeah, would have interested me to see whether that's the same experience for our people today. But anyway, let's get going. You guys keep questions coming. If there are any, we'll have a section at the end, but we always sort of have these few moments of pause where you can throw them in. Now, risks or mitigating them. We now have a clear vision, one that's inspiring, one that's interesting, and that reflects key stakeholder interests and is still bold and directional, not just an average collection of ideas and a meme. Now, it's very tempting, because you've spent so much energy on coming up with that vision, to just get into implementation, right? Just get going, get started, execute the plan. And this is exactly the point where we typically say, let's pause for a moment. And this is where we think organizational prototypes come into play. And I get into those in a bit. Because remember, we're trying to avoid a couple of things. When we think back to that initial picture where we make this plan and then we roll it out, we run into problems and only a couple of things stick. We want to avoid all that. And here are a couple of things at this phase in a change or transformation process where we have to be cautious not to get into the same traps again. The first one, quite obvious one, we have this, especially in management teams these days, this bias for action. Get things done, have quick wins ready, right? You have to have something to show for it. And I totally get the idea, and it's better to get things done than to overthink things. But sometimes symptoms or surface level problems come in disguise as quick wins. So they're quick wins because they're not solving the problem. And we have to be cautious about those. Then there's rushing into untested master plans. Now this is the entire planning fallacy, where you plan, get this huge roadmap of measures that have to be taken, 2/3 of those suggested by ChatGPT, and you think, well, that's your change roadmap there. And the third one, and this is particularly interesting for the people in this conversation or in this webinar, as a change leader, as someone who is supposed to drive change in your organization, you have certain goals and KPIs to fulfill. You have to report on your project to your superior. So you'd rather not overpromise and underdeliver. So all this basically tells us, be careful not to jump to quick conclusions and implement things where you're not really sure whether they're solving any problem whatsoever. Now, along these lines, we found that real change, real transformative change, doesn't happen in boardrooms. Decisions are being taken in boardrooms, but real change happens in the periphery of your organization, in the teams. Or as we say, follow the pain. Follow the pain of transformation, and you'll land somewhere in your teams. And that's where we have to look, because that's where the problems arise, and that's also where problems get solved, whether we know it or not. So that's exactly where we need to look. But how do we find these solutions? How do we find the right problems to solve and the right solutions to build? And we've had quite a bit of success using a systemic approach. We call these searchlights. So we use searchlights to scan different areas of potential friction in the organization. Now, obviously, technology in technology-driven transformations seems to be the likely problem, but very often it's not. Very often it's the processes that prevent people from using the technology effectively, or the organizational structure just keeps decision-making locked away for an elite of decision makers. So you claim ownership in your organization, but the organization doesn't allow for it. Or you have an incentive structure that discourages behavior change because it's just not valid to do so. And there might be capabilities that are missing. People aren't just fit for the change. They need a bit of enablement and training. And let's be honest, most of our transformative change challenges are multi-factor problems. They are not in one of those areas, but they're in all of them at once. And that's what makes the stage so important. Now, how do we address that complexity? What do we do about it now that we know what to look for? We build what we call minimum viable changes. In short, organizational prototypes. We borrowed that idea from product development, where nothing ever happens these days without building prototypes, because the environment is just too complex to control, and you just can't build software like you build an airplane. And that's pretty much the same story with change we've found. And here's how it works. So in the targeted research phase, using that searchlights that we just talked about, we know where the real issue lies. And then we go into those teams, to the people, and define what the problem actually is. We also use these people, line managers, normal team members, to come up with ideas, solutions. And we package these ideas into testable prototypes, small practical changes in the organization. These can be very simple and small, to be honest. Organizational prototypes could be a new meeting format, or a shadowing routine that's implemented, or, I don't know, a temporary permission structure that works differently than it does now. And we test these prototypes in the live system, maybe not in all teams at once, just in 2 out of 10 teams, but we test them in the live system, gather feedback, iterate these prototypes. And then we observe what does work, what does cause more problems than solve problems, and what has the potential to get rolled out in the entirety of the organization. But here's the trick. We don't just rely on one prototype, because that gets us into trouble again, because we rely on this one thing and this has to work, and we're very unlikely to sacrifice a prototype, because in the end, prototypes are there also to fail. They're supposed and are allowed to fail. But we rather build several prototypes regarding several problems that we've encountered in our research phase. Let me give you an example. Now, for a client of ours who runs a big services company, we had a simple but challenging contract to fulfill. We were supposed to make the organization, which consists of both blue-collar workers and white-collar workers, more permeable, more transparent for communication and collaboration. So to make it more innovative, because management felt, well, we have lots of potential in our baseline, in our frontline workers, but we can't use it because people aren't talking to each other and aren't working together. So that was the challenge. So what we come up with was a series of interventions that we found out talking to these people. And so one prototype was about implementing a new tool for communication, a new digital platform for communication. Another tool was setting up a community of key users to co-create software for the company, for their users. So that way users could better influence what the tools were like they were using on a daily basis to do their jobs. And finally, we came up with new meeting formats and routines so that people could engage in a more productive conversation about the work that they were doing. Now, what this allows us is that we don't only look at these organizational prototypes in isolation and see what works on a very sort of granular basis, but we see also how these prototypes interact with each other, how the introduction of a new communication tool changes the way how people run their team meetings, for instance. So by doing this, we had combined momentum, and the interaction of these created somehow a ripple effect, if you will. And with this parallel prototyping, we accelerate the learning process and find out what aspects of these prototypes are fit for rollout. So at this point, we inform our rollout strategy after we've spent a couple of weeks or months trying out what works and what doesn't. And the cherry on top, with those prototypes that worked, we already have proof that they work. We have something to show for. And in that example back then, when we started rolling out for the entire company, there was no big surprise anymore because people already knew, I know what's coming, this works, we've seen it work, we had people talking about it, and that's the beauty of such a prototype approach to change. Now, to wrap this up, this part, I want to leave you with a final metaphor. I don't know if you've seen this series. Maybe it's a midlife crisis thing on my behalf, but I was fascinated by this series where Dan Buettner investigated why in some places in the earth people are living longer than average. And he came up with something they called a silver buckshot approach. It's a countermodel to that silver bullet approach where you find the one thing that solves all your problems, but a silver buckshot approach. And there is rarely one solution that solves all the problems. Instead, true transformation, or in this case, getting real old, comes from a cascade or a combination of well-placed interventions. And I believe this idea translates beautifully to change management because you don't search for the one lever to pull, but you design a system of levers and then fire them in sync for successful transformation. That is that.
All right, there's one question regarding the MVC approach that we always get asked, and is how many are enough and how many are too many? So you had 3 minimum viable changes on your slide, but maybe it's interesting for the audience because it's a question that comes up every time. How many of these minimum viable changes should you have?
Good question. Well, the bullshit answer would be, it depends. But that doesn't suffice, does it? I would say have more than one, at least. Because if you just have one prototype that you're focusing on, one targeted intervention, you run the risk of investing too much love and care into that one prototype, and you won't allow it to fail. And having these prototypes set up in a manner that they're allowed to fail is key, because otherwise you wouldn't prototype anything. So I'd say have 2 or 3 running in parallel, attacking different parts of the problem, and choose them in a way that they can, if possible, inform the other prototypes. So yeah, more than one, I'd say, at the same time.
Once you really activated more than one of your minimum viable change prototypes, and you kind of know which one you want to implement and which one you want to roll out, you're ready to start kind of getting everything into place. How do you handle the most important part? So letting go. That's why we call the last chapter Let Them. Building a system of balancing control and ownership. So control because you kind of have to have an overview of the initiatives running, and ownership because teams kind of have to use that muscle to really get into transformation and do things on their own. Some of the things that we see here are kind of 3 mindsets. So the first thing is a kind of a state of confusion. So I know I have to start, and maybe you all kind of felt that in your career as well. So where do I start? What do I do next? How do I get into that kind of transformation? I have this vision, I kind of know KPIs, but how do I get going with the first step? The second one comes a little later. People or teams are doing things, and now comes the doubt. Am I even allowed to do that? Do I have that responsibility? What happens if I make a mistake or take the wrong decision, or I make a decision and someone higher up in the hierarchy comes and doesn't like it? And the last one is, and it's, I think, the most common one that we encounter, it's kind of a change fatigue. Maybe I will just sit this one out and see what happens if I don't do anything. What I find is that as change leaders or change managers, we need to train a muscle, and we have to have a reflex of always thinking about where on the balance are we, or where on the scale are we, in the balance between control and ownership. So is the team or are people confused because there's a lack of control and there's no clear direction, nothing is moving forward? Or are we in a place where we're over-controlling and suffocating ownership? And usually the reflex tends towards the right. So most organizations, if there's any confusion, react by tightening the reins. So more steering committees, more management meetings, more playbooks, more compliance, more processes to kind of counterbalance this confusion. But this command and control leadership style is only fueling resistance and not ownership. So the tighter you grip, the faster engagement is dropping. And the other thing is, if you have full autonomy, this isn't the answer either. So you kind of need to get the right middle in this paradox of clear guardrails and meaningful ownership. The answers are, so there are many leadership frameworks or many leadership books that give you answers to that kind of questions. This is not what we're going to do right now. But we just want to give you 4 tips each if you kind of find yourself on the one end of the scale or the other. When you are experiencing confusion in your teams, focus on building confidence and ownership and really promote self-responsibility within teams or organizations. And the other one is hand over the steering wheel, hand over the control back to the team very actively. The first thing, if we think about how to build confidence, ownership, and the feeling of self-responsibility, is providing directions. So be clear on expectation, on metrics, be clear on what people should do or what you want to achieve together with them. And if you have the feeling you've said it so many times that you can't hear it anymore, it just starts resonating. So once you can't hear it anymore, it's just the right amount of communication. The second one is, and I like that one a lot, is change agent or process buddies. We've implemented that very successfully in the past. So get people from the outside or from the inside of the organization to have a sparings partner for the people who need to change. This can be a team effort, this can be a one-on-one situation, this can be for a specific process or for a specific program, but really get people to focus on that kind of thing and have someone to talk to ask questions to, and to really have a safe space of testing and experimenting with the change. The last thing, or the third thing, is teams always cry for more standards and more processes if they are feeling confused. And same with the minimum viable change, we propose using minimum viable standards. What is the most pragmatic thing that you need, the most pragmatic process, the most pragmatic governance, the most pragmatic guidelines that you need right now for the team to keep moving? Some teams then go into a month-long definition of process, or they try to get governance playbooks that are pages long and need to be assigned by all sorts of business departments. Try to not lose momentum and really use this minimum viable standard. And if you find something isn't working, test, review, and adjust. So take 6 to 8 weeks, leave something out, see if you're missing it, invent something new, see if it works, if it resonates, and if you see it doesn't, just let it go again. And in the other way, if you want to hand over control, focus on the what needs to be done, and not on the how it needs to be done. Let the team figure that out. even if you have tight deadlines or are under a lot of pressure, try as a leadership to create that playing field where the team can figure it out on their own, and build structures that allow to hand over control. So define tolerances. There's not one deadline, but there's a timing in which they need to finish something. Try safe to try boundaries for everyone. There's a percentage of the budget that people can use to kind of play with. So the team can act and doesn't have to come to management decision every time they run into an obstacle. My favorite one on this slide is the impact meets irreversibility decision mindset. So fostering a mindset in the team where every decision becomes about not thinking about the decision, but thinking about what impact will it have and is it reversible or not. If you have a low and middle impact decision that is really reversed very easy for the team to handle that by themselves. If you have a very high risk, high impact situation, this should always go to management. So you don't have to ask for every decision that you make, am I going to do that by myself or am I going to escalate that? But really foster that mindset that before you think about what am I actually deciding, is that high impact and is that reversible? And the last thing, I think that's a no-brainer, listen a lot, support and very actively hand over the steering wheel. And lastly, with all change that we're going through, once you committed to change, it's a stony path, and acknowledge that it's a stony path. Do that again and again. Celebrate growth on that path, and take a moment to reflect with your team, with every person, how far they have come on the way. Because focusing on the daily grind, and we know that in a lot of project work, especially under pressure and with tight deadlines, you kind of are in a checking mode. Have I filled out every canvas? Have I gone through every step in the framework? We forget to see the entire path that we're on. And I've seen in the past teams that started out with very small steps and they have grown beyond themselves when given enough responsibility. Teams that have not given up, that have moved in circles again and again, they have started from scratch multiple times, but they were given the space to do that, the space to fail and to come up with a new prototype, because they were convinced that what they wanted to change really mattered. And sometimes we also forget how much effort and energy every one of us has to put into the discussions, the untying the knots, the really heavy lifting that needs to be done when we're doing transformative and pioneering work, especially with digital technology. So closing this, because I see we only have a couple of minutes left, I will close that chapter with a reflection question. So think about your journey or your team's journey, your organization, and when was the last time that you really looked back and appreciated the way that you have come despite all the obstacles reality shoots at you from left and right?
Great, thanks. Carmen and team, how are we looking? Any questions from the audience? Or
Yes, there's one question in the chat, and this is from Magdalena. It says, is there a certain type of change for which you particularly recommend the MVC approach? Or are there also changes where it's not suitable or indicated?
Tricky question. I want you to reflect on this as well. To be honest, every time there is a multi-factor problem, I believe you have to go prototyping. When we compare it to product development, say you're supposed to build a standard feature in an app that's just the market standard right now, or you have a regulatory pressure to do it, there's not so many moving parts, because you just have to do it. You have to do it in a certain way to comply with regulation, and that's the way to go. If you're doing something entirely new, something that hasn't been done in your context or for the target group you're proposing, you're in for trouble if you just go ahead and do it. And I believe in such situations where there's a high level of uncertainty, where you haven't done such things beforehand. And there's many different people involved that could suffer or benefit from it. There, I think prototyping change works. I believe prototyping in a small scale is always a good idea, but particularly when you're not sure what to expect, I'd say.
Yeah, and when you're having kind of a high-risk environment, when you're thinking about something new where you don't see all the facets that you might need to reflect on. So my take on this question is, yes, you should prototype. You should prototype more often than you shouldn't. And the real thing is, what size and scope and form does the prototype have? So there is a lot of different things that you can do. Don't think. So when we talk about prototypes, most of us, because we're working in a digital space, think about some sort of interface, some sort of interactive thing that we create and then we test. This doesn't have to be true. Prototypes can take a lot of different forms and sizes. So just think about the very common method of Wizard of Oz. Build something that happens in a certain time of the day in a certain place. So it could be you walk into your lunch area at work and suddenly something works different than it did yesterday. Might be a new process, might be someone talking to you about a special topic. So it's really about getting creative with the prototypes and not the question, should you prototype or not?
Okay, I think that answers the question pretty well. And I can see people starting to leave. So I think I would close that up with a big thank you to Regina and Franz for sharing all that insights. And there's one last offer that we can make you. So there's a QR code coming up, hopefully. Yes, here it is. So if you scan that QR code, you can schedule or book a 15 minutes free expert session with the two of them. So if there's something that you need sparring on, or there's a tricky step that you want to discuss, feel free to set up a meeting with Regina and Franz. And if you have any other feedback or would like to get in touch, always drop us a line at marketing@raysono.com. We're always happy for feedback and input. So thank you very much for spending an hour of your life.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks for having us.
I wish you a good rest of the week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.